go up and budgets get tighter. So sometimes they'll do a preliminary phone interview. Occasionally a student might be a part of that on a phone interview. Certainly the search committee would be a part of the phone interview. And then the other thing is sometimes they may shortlist 5 and bring in their top 3. You know, like Monday we'll have one person, Tuesday another person, Wednesday another person. We'll make our decision by Thursday. Occasionally you even know, they won't tell you this, but you can tell that you're in there at the same time as another applicant, right? Because they look especially afraid. Oh, I've got to pick somebody up at 11, I'll be right back, you know. So that may happen. But often, you know, there might be a little bit more spacing. And then another technique that I've seen is that one person is brought in, they make a decision about that person, and then if they pass, then they call and bring in a second person. So you get the phone call, and it'll probably go something like this. Hi, I'm Dr. Rodgers. I'm calling from the Ohio State University. We're very interested in your application materials. We would like for you to come for a day and share your work with us and have an interview. We're looking at 2 or 3 days next month. Let me give you the dates. Would you be available on any of those? So you set up your dates, and then a lot of times it could be an assistant, like a clerical person, and they'll give you details about where you need to be and when. Later, they may send you an agenda or any special requirements. And then the other thing is travel information. So a lot of times, it's often the applicant who will buy their ticket, but then get reimbursed for it. So as long as your ticket, you know, is anywhere in that $200 to $500 range, that seems to be what we pay in America to fly somewhere, you should be fine. I had a situation one time where I had a job interview in Canada and a job interview in Texas, and I had to get there in 6 hours, and the only fare was $1,300. So if you have something that's weird like that, just call and check and say, this is the best rate I can get. Is it going to be okay? You know, a lot of times you're flying into the nearest airport, which is off near the university, but not always. So it helps to know where these universities are. You know, if you've ever been to the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, you're probably not going to fly in there, even though they have an airport and 2 flights a day. You're probably going to fly into Atlanta and get the bus. So you have to kind of figure out all those wrinkles. The other thing that I would be really, really clear on is who's picking you up, what's their name, what's their cell. You know, if there's going to be a snowstorm the day before your interview, probably, with your luck, yeah, that's going to happen. So you know, or a misconnect flight or something like that. So you want to have your backup plan in place, okay? It can be expensive, right? You're a poor doctoral student. You're going on 10 interviews. They're $500 tickets. That's $5,000. And universities, as you know, are well renowned for their ability to reimburse easily, effectively, and efficiently, right? So that's a consideration for people who may be, you know, having limited funds, and that'll be something to think about. So what I'm about to talk about next is the actual visit. But before we talk about the visit, is there anything you wanted to talk about with relation to the role of the search committee in making their shortlist, or the creation of the, you know, the invitation to the campus?
I just wanted to, I wasn't aware of how fast it happens. Yep. I turned in an application 2 weeks ago. I got a call on Friday.
Yep.
My ticket's bought. I'm going out in 2 weeks.
Woohoo!
I had to have my abstracts, you know, bio, but how fast that turnaround when you have to have your abstract and bio in, when you're still doing your research, you know, and getting that job talk. So that's something as you start applying, for the early people applying now, have that stuff ready to go, because that's, you know what I mean? To get that together was a quick turnaround, so that was kind of something I would definitely think about as you're applying.
Another tip I would make in terms of gathering your materials might be to gather syllabi in your discipline. Especially, you know, you're doing, you know, 9,000 level courses. Get the second 2,000 level syllabus for, you know, school and society or something, so that, you know what's taught in those levels, in case it becomes relevant during the interview, or, you know, you're going to be teaching that course next year. So that's something to think about too.
Yeah, I pulled up their program so I could look up.
Yeah, for sure. That would be something you'd want to do before you go, right? Like look at the program. You're likely to get an itinerary a few days, if not a week or so, before your visit. on that will be a number of names, including some of the names that you'll kind of go, oh, I bet they're at the search committee. You might also be communicating with the chair of the search committee a couple of times to set up some stuff, which we'll talk about in a moment, like the job talk and maybe a teaching demonstration. So looking at those names and then reading their bios and looking at the different kinds of web pages, like student advising pages, will really help give you a sense of what the institution's about. Other questions about the role of the search committee or pre-departure things before your big day?
What if there was an institution relatively close, like maybe 4 hours or something like that?
Yep.
And they either wanted you to drive or wanted you to fly, and you wanted to do the other.
Yep.
How would you finagle that?
I've flown to Saginaw Valley State University, which is 4 hours from here, I think. Yeah. So I think, and oftentimes, for you, financially, it's better if you drive because it's 50 cents a mile, right? I mean, well, I'd rather have that $400 or $500 cash than pay $200 to, Delta, right? So, but really, to be honest, if you're doing a big job search and, you're trying to finish your dissertation, this is really about speed for you, right? You don't have a lot of time. You need to get up there quick. So that's often the plane, and you can work on a plane, but you can't work behind the wheel. So I think if the expense is more or less the same, you might say, oh, I have a need to drive or I have a need to fly because you can just say because of other work commitments or I need to make a stop en route or something like that. Now that might be to your favorite pie stand in Toledo, Schmuckers. Oh, it's so good. But creating a reasonable rationale, and if the expense is the same, I think is reasonable.
I
Other
do
questions?
think, though, that you're being interviewed from that very first
Yeah.
moment.
To be
So
sure.
know that even if it's just an assistant who's doing your travel with you, I mean, word can get out. So I think it's viable to ask. On the other hand, you don't want to get the reputation from the get-go of being challenging to work with or anything like that.
Yeah, that's so valuable information. So we'll segue now into the visit, right? So I think the first thing that you need to understand is every single contact with you is some kind of interview. When you leave, every single person, including staff, are going to get sheets that are asking to evaluate you and write narratives. Some of those sheets can be more than one page. It could be a couple pages, including both Likert scale and narrative items. So, everything's in an interview. If that light bulb doesn't work in the hotel room, don't mention it. Bring a candle. Didn't you show up prepared? So, every moment you're being interviewed. Everything's being assessed from your dress and your appearance to your ability to not go to the bathroom for 8 hours. Why didn't they build that in on the agenda, right? So the other thing that I would say that's just a little bit delicate sometimes is often there will be a social occasion like a dinner or a lunch or something like that. And so alcohol, in America, alcohol is a very delicate kind of situation. In Canada, it's not. Like everybody says, what are you going to have? You want a beer? But in America, it's delicate because especially at state universities cannot reimburse for alcohol. So a lot of times if somebody says, oh, let's order wine, what would you like? That actually comes from a special fund. So what I want to say is when you're in these occasions, these social occasions, don't drink alcohol until somebody else does. And then if somebody else does, it's okay for you. But don't be the first one to order that cold, crisp glass of Chardonnay that you might be craving. So just because of the way the expenses work. Yeah. All right, so here we go. Your special day comes. The most common that I've seen is you fly in sort of in the afternoon, and then maybe there's a dinner in the evening. You overnight in the hotel, and then the next day it is on. Like 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 5 you're back on the airport. So I've learned to, when you get up in the morning, you're not going to be back in the hotel room. Don't forget to take your luggage with you, right? And you'll learn how to pack really small, because you can be toting your socks around all day, in these professional situations, unless they give you a place you can leave your bag or something. So the fourth thing then is the campus visit. Yeah, so it's likely to include some sort of social time, like a lunch or dinner, especially a dinner if you fly in the evening before. It's probably going to include a 1 hour sort of formal interview with the search committee. It will include probably a 30-minute or longer formal interview with somebody like a department chair. And also there will be an administrator above them. At a smaller university, it'll probably be the dean. At a larger university, it might be the associate dean. So we say dean or designee. And at the smallest universities, it might even be the university president or vice president. In addition to that, you might be asked to, well, you always will be asked to do what we call the job talk, which is the talk about your research. And that's typically about an hour long. So we say job talk, which is really research talk. And I think at about 50%, maybe even 3/4 of interviews, you'll often be asked to do a teaching demonstration. So my area is teacher education. I work a lot with pre-service teachers, so they don't carefully align that teaching demonstration with what you're doing, right? So it might be something like, oh, we got a second-year psych class. Can you come in for an hour out of the 2-hour class and teach about Piaget? Okay, sure. I remember that course I took on Piaget for my master's degree, I think. So it can be like a little bit tricky. They try to do a little bit of matching, but if you're going in on a Tuesday and the course that's in your area of expertise on a Wednesday, guess what? You're presenting on Tuesday, right? So that can be a little bit tricky. And there'll be another meal in there probably too, right? Lunch on the next day or something. We've even had breakfast meetings at 7:30 in the morning, so some of these can start quite early. Sometimes the hotel is not especially near the campus. It could be like 45 minutes away. So, doing a little bit of advance work about where's the hotel and where's the campus, and sort of having that expectation can be helpful. At OSU, we have 5 campuses. So if you applied for a position at Newark, you'd be on both. You'd be in Newark and Columbus, meeting with the Newark people and the Columbus people. When that happens here, those are actually 2-day interviews, 2 full days. So quite challenging to be on like that for 2 full days. Am I missing anything, Shane?
Sometimes meeting with students.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
We often ask for student input.
Yeah. Nothing else? You get real outliers sometimes, like, the real estate agent to show you the town. That can be stuff when it's, not New York. Like Potsdam, upstate New York, or Thunder Bay, Ontario. Those are ones where the real estate agent took me around the town. So I actually took Leah McGee, the Clay Endowed Chair, around Columbus. She used to live here and did a degree here, I think her undergrad degree. And so we just showed her a little bit of town just to give her a sense of what it was about. So, but generally, like sometimes they'll contract that out. Oh, and then the other person who you are sure to meet with is probably going to be like some sort of HR person. Yeah. Human resources. Yeah. So what kinds of things get talked about? Well, in the search committee, they're looking for, they sometimes they can be very specific. They have specific courses that they need taught, and they wonder about you and your ability to teach those courses and how you feel about teaching those courses. And sometimes courses are courses that faculty, they may come with a reputation like phonics. And different people have feelings about teaching a course called phonics, a name mandated by state legislators. So there can be sensitivity about those things. The search committee might ask about that. They might ask about your alignment with the job description. They may have a protocol of questions that they created prior to the interview that they are required to follow because of the university interpretations of their job hiring policy. They will likely ask about your research. They want to know if you have the ability to be tenured at this particular institution. So that's something that they're going to ask about. They may have, sometimes they have ulterior motives, like they're being killed by service. Let's get the new guy to do it. So they'll ask about your commitment to service or commitment to students or those kinds of things. But remember, they are not the only ones interviewing you. You're interviewing them, right? So you should ask questions that you would like to have answered. For example, what is a typical teaching load at the institution? Look for little wrinkles, like are all of the courses 3 credit hours or are some of the courses 5 credit hours? Is there an expectation to do work that is related to teaching that you may not get credit for, but you're expected to do, such as student-teacher supervision? Like, does that count as a course, or is that extra work that you have to do in addition to a course? Are the courses generally offered in fall and spring, freeing you in the summer to pursue your research agenda? Or are you expected to teach in the summer? So you have to teach fall, spring, summer. Or is it flexible, or what? So doing those kinds of conversations can be really helpful. Also, what are sort of the expectations for tenure at the university? That is a question you'll want to ask many different people, and you're listening for, do you hear the same answer across interviews, or are you hearing different answers across interviews? Because if you're hearing different answers across interviews, then you know the university may not have a coherent policy or set of expectations around promotion and tenure. Other times when you hear the same answer, then that's a good sign. That means everybody's on the same page. Now, some places like OSU, we're very creative. So if you asked anyone that question here, we would say something like, well, we have a wide range of interpretations of what makes for quality and scholarly excellence, right? And so nobody's really particular. But sometimes when pushed, somebody will name something, very particular. And it might be something like 2 publications per year during the 5-year pre-tenure period, with the expectation that half of those be first or sole author. Isn't that great? Finally, a straight answer, right? So those would be the kinds of things that you could be on the lookout for. In terms of the department chair, a lot of the questions you might ask of the search committee, you could also ask of the department chair. I think that those often are sort of similar conversations. The department chair is likely to ask you some similar questions as well. Sometimes the dean or higher up people are thinking sort of bigger mission. It might be about, especially if you're doing something that might be perceived as, a hot topic, like homelessness or LGBT or, positivist approaches versus post-positivist approaches, or accountability issues in education, or gender, or achievement gaps. Sometimes there are different levels of sensitivity to those issues at different institutions. So the dean or higher up person might ask about those kinds of things. Sometimes this is really more of a conversation, more of a chat than an interview, you might notice. The student meetings are, I think, one of the toughest ones for me, because the students have often been corralled and been told they have to go. Occasionally there's 1 or 2 students in there who has a lot to say, because like they're the president of the student something. And you know the least about their experience. So what I've learned is to sort of turn the tables and just get them to talk and tell you about what their experience is and what their challenges are. And you can do, sort of empathetic listening to kind of gather information. And then I think, they're smart enough to know that you have to say something, right? So you can share a little bit or even talk about your own experience. And that's generally well received by students. The HR, they can tell you, they are often not involved in the research or teaching components, but they can tell you stuff about what annual increments tend to be, different kinds of opportunities for professional leave or travel funds to conferences, or whether you get a laptop when you arrive at the institution or inherit old Joe's computer, or things like that. In a larger university, we call that the startup package or startup funds, but sometimes at smaller universities, they kind of go through and bullet those. Sometimes, especially with domestic students who are changing careers, you're very interested in the retirement or pension plan, because if you can contribute to the same pension plans when you were a teacher, that really helps with your service and so on. So those would be the kinds of things that come up there. In terms of spousal hire, you could mention it with the search committee, the department chair, the dean, with the HR, that would be appropriate. And then the last 2, the researcher job talk is where you get to present your research. So generally, you would probably be expected to do a talk of about 30 minutes with, PowerPoint slides, or you can be more fancy if you don't want to do PowerPoint. Then probably allow, 10 or 15 minutes for questions, and 10 or 15 minutes to pass on to the next activity. bear in mind that you may not be talking to people in your subdiscipline, so you want to make it approachable and engaging to everybody. That's something that you'll want to take some time to prepare. So it's very hectic, right, for your first job, but by the time you get to the fifth one, you're very polished and accomplished at this. A lot of people often do, it's their AERA talk. You know, they got on the AERA program, yay, and this is their 13 minutes expanded, maybe more data, more analysis, and those kinds of things into a 30-minute talk. And then the last thing is that teaching demo. So, you know, it's a little bit tricky because they may give you a couple of classes and say teach either one, and you have an hour, and you get an hour, but the class is 2 hours long. Sometimes you might have direct communication with the instructor or the syllabus, or they want you to teach a particular thing. They'll try and give you a little bit of latitude, but not too much, so it can be a little bit tricky. And, you know, showing up with a reasonably engaging presentation, but one that connects to the material, and one that I think, you know, I use Socratic method a lot, but I think there's some expectation of a little bit of direct instruction in there. You know, just sitting and talking is, for a lot of universities, probably not a teaching demonstration. Now, we could argue over that, because this is OSU. But, you know, I think that some people will expect some kind of presenting to the students. So, you know, hopefully, you've had a chance to have some teaching experience, or if not teaching, if you're working more in the lab, you know, some sort of leading experience of the group. That'll be as good. I think that's not really a big issue for us in our college, right? If you're in pharmacy and you've never ever done a presentation in front of a group before, this is a big deal for them. But we even have a course called How to Teach in Higher Ed, you know, for pharmacists and doctors and nurses and stuff. But, you know, I think for us, this is not too difficult. And that's pretty much the day. If you think about it, and these are 30 minutes to an hour long, you know, half hour, hour and a half, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5. There's the day, starting at 7:30 in the morning up to 4 o'clock, and you're on a jet plane at 6. So, tough. It's a long day. May go to a day and a half. Questions about the campus visit?
Do you need to wear a suit the whole time?
You know, I would dress professionally appropriate,
Okay.
and I think what that can mean to different people is different.
Okay.
I had a guy, my boss actually, went to a job at the University of New Mexico, and his luggage didn't make it, so he showed up in t-shirt and shorts and sneakers, because that's all he had the day before when he flew. Yeah, but, I mean, you know, it's a one-night thing. So I think he had a longer trip, so he had checked luggage, but you guys are probably just packing a roll-on, right? Any other questions about the campus visit? Okay. I know we have a lot of internationals in the room, so I'm an international myself, born in Canada, didn't move to the US till I was 30. I've had 5 different kinds of visas, and I've had the joy of spending a lot of time at the United States Customs and Immigration Service in different places and under different circumstances. I've been yelled at and I have been rubber gloved. So what are some questions that often come up from internationals? One is, sometimes there will be in the ad something along the lines of experience with US schools, or experience teaching in US settings, or something like that. So, you know, I was always able to hide because I was from Canada, and apparently that was close enough. And, you know, we could deconstruct that for a long time. But, you know, I think that often as a part of the credentialing of the institution, we used to call it NK, now we call it CAPE, there's an expectation that people in the pre-service teacher work often have a teaching license valid in the U.S. I had a Canadian one, apparently nobody thought to check. Or, you know, have a lot of experience with, U.S. learners. I think at some institutions that's more literal than at other institutions. And I think there's sort of some rubber room, you know, that if you're in a popularly taught subject like English education, maybe there's not much latitude, but if you're in a high need, you know, topic like special needs children or, second language acquisition, maybe that there's a more flexibility. So I would urge you to not be put off by that, to really punch up your teaching experience. Often too, I've learned with some of the internationals, but not all, there's an expectation that you go from your beginning your degree, your first degree, on into higher ed, and you not work as a professional in teaching. Like that's in some of the Asian countries that I work with, that's a more expected career line. Whereas in North America, the expectation is that you work for at least a couple of years somewhere with kids. Not necessarily school, but with kids somehow, some which way. Thinking about punching up how you can talk about your experience with children might be important if that's stated, but I wouldn't take it too literally. The other thing that has happened is international students sometimes feel under very high pressure to land the job, because if they don't, then their student visa will expire, and then they have to go home, which is not a bad thing, of course. I think most internationals know that USCIS does give you a 1 year, I forget what they call it, but it's that employment authorization card that would allow you to stay here and work for a year past your F1 or your J1 visa. So that's an option. And then the other thing that I would say is I don't think it's impossible to apply for American jobs from overseas. I'm going to Jakarta next month. It's $800 round trip. My in-laws wanted to go to Los Angeles. That's $500 from here. That's $500 round trip. So cost is not really the big issue, right? So I wouldn't give up. I don't think you should think, well, if I don't get that job, I'm sunk. I don't think you're sunk. I do think you can apply for jobs overseas. And I do think, we're a more global society now, so I would hope that some faculty would be more open to looking at you as a candidate. Yeah. And then generally the pathway for internationals is that you'll have your employment authorization card so you can start work. The university would then start on an H1, which allows you to work here for 3 years, renewable for an additional 3. And then from the H, you go to the permanent resident card, which we call a green card. And after 5 years, you can apply for citizenship. So for international students, this is really a big lifestyle issue, right? Do you want to live in the U.S. and become a citizen? Whereas for domestic students, it's about getting a job. The one thing you might hear is there's a limit on H-1Bs, not for nonprofits, so that's not an issue. The other thing for internationals is you could bring that up, right? There are going to be fees associated with that. So at a big university like Ohio State, we have support for helping you through those immigration processes. At a small university like Saginaw Valley State University, they have no supports at all. She said, well, I'm here on a student visa, I'll need to move to a different visa type. And they'll say, well, we can recommend a good lawyer in town. Well, that process could be $10,000, right? At the University of Dayton, they facilitated me getting an H1, which allowed me to work here for 3 to 6 years. But they did not have the supports to get to go from the H to the green card. So they recommended an attorney, and they gave me up to $2,500 cash to cover the legal expenses. Asking questions like, what are the supports that you have for somebody who's not a U.S. citizen but seeks to work here would be an appropriate question. The other question that I would really encourage you to ask, sometimes they'll have 20 minutes at the end of the day for any unanswered questions. And so my last question going out the door is always, what is the timeline for you for contacting the successful applicant? And they might say anything from tomorrow to a couple months. But that could be helpful if you get a second offer in the meantime. So that's good to know. Any questions about the campus visit? Yes.
So if you're not successful, do they usually contact you right away?
No.
I didn't know if there was a flip side.
Generally, probably going to contact the most successful person first, and then there can be a week or 2 or 3 where they're sort of sorting out whether they're going to take the job. And then if they don't, you might be second choice. So, it could be longer. And sometimes they go, if we don't get our first choice, we'll just wait till next year. Anything else about this? Okay. So our last topic, you go home, you finish off your dissertation, you defend, you're waiting eagerly by the telephone, waiting for it to ring. And so finally it rings. Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you the position of Assistant Professor of Education at our university. And so, the job negotiation begins. Well, it's very difficult to negotiate the job position on your cell phone as you drive up 315 on a busy Friday afternoon. So if you do get a call like that, you might want to say, I am so thrilled, I'm very interested. Don't commit to taking it or not taking it. I'm so interested in talking to you more about this position. I can't talk right now, let's set up a time. Another possibility is they'll email you to set up a time, right? And so probably the department chair or the dean is likely the person that you would be talking to. And then probably they're going to tell you orally what the offer is. So the offer is going to have things like the base salary. It may have opportunities for additional teaching that could boost your salary. Or additional, things that they might want you to undertake, like running the reading lab. And if you did that, then they would be prepared to pay you an extra so many dollars or something like that. Generally, as a starting out person, we really encourage you to be very careful about that. It sounds great, I can make an extra 10,000, but if you're not getting your pubs out, you're not going to get tenured, that 10,000 won't go long when you're on the unemployment line, right? So, so just think about that as nice to know, but maybe you don't want to commit just yet. So we've got the base salary, we've got the additional salary. It might include things like startup, and startup can include travel money to conferences. It can include things like computer and so on, office space. It might include whether there would be a student worker or a grad assistant, and whether that worker is in a pool where there's like a student worker for 20 hours a week and all of the 3 faculty and literacy share him. Or whether it's, you get your own GA for 20 hours a week to do whatever you want. So student worker or GA. And it might include, any extra duties like they might talk generally about your course load, a course load of 3 and 3, teaching the kinds of courses we discussed, and we'll finalize that list later. It might be something like that. So, load. And any additional expectations, additional responsibilities. So you're busily writing this down. Did I miss anything?
In terms of the funds, it can also include things like whether or not sometimes you can get summer salary for a year or 2 as a junior faculty. Sometimes you can get a course release as junior faculty. It would include your buyout rate if you're intending on maybe getting some grant funding and buying out, or getting a course release some other type. It could include even research funds and some startup packages depending on if it's a research intensive university. Basically, as much as anything you'd want to have in writing, you want to be able to negotiate and then actually have in your letter.
So it'll be stated this way, right? Course release. Well, for beginning faculty, they're eligible to apply for release from 2 courses during the probationary period. They'll say something like a base salary of $50,000 or $60,000 or $40,000 or whatever that number is. Additional salary might be expressed in a percentage. So here the number is 1/9. We have a fraction. 1/9 if you teach an extra course in summer or something like that. Travel money varies. Here at OSU it varies between units. It can vary between departments and campuses. So at my campus we get $2,800. Every faculty member gets $2,800 a year for travel. At Marion campus they get $1,600. And here I think you get 25? 2,000?
Yeah.
2,000, yeah. Computer, that's kind of almost an expectation, but some places like my campus in Newark is very forward thinking, and you just pick it out from if you have any special needs too, you can explain those, like if you're doing a lot of work with video and you need a faster computer or something. Some places are sort of very backward. Care to make a comment about this campus in terms of computer support?
I'm still junior faculty, so I'm gonna
Alright.
pass on that.
Says it all. Oh crap, we're being taped. But the point is, right, like get that information when you're on your visit about, what kinds of things that you're likely to expect, right? Yeah. And the student in the GA. I think at a smaller place, like a regional campus university or a University of Toledo or University of Dayton, you can expect the base salary, you can expect a small amount of course release, additional salary summers if you accept it. There'll be travel money and a computer and office, of course. Student workers and GAs, not typical, maybe in some situations. Research funds, probably not. Maybe there'll be a central pool you can apply to, like a $5,000 or $10,000 grant. Here, getting hired on at OSU, you might get $10,000 in research funds. Not always, depends on the budget, right, that year, but you might.
In the department.
Yeah. The course release, the research-intensive universities tend to have lower courses anyway. I think Columbus, they teach 2 and 2, and New York, we teach 3 and 3. That's our typical load. So the regional campus is more teaching intensive, right, as you would expect. And we have different requirements for tenure, so our SEIs need to be good. Here, they would need, more publications, I think. Newark, we would have quality publications, but not as many, because we're teaching more. So that kind of shows you how we're comparing two units within the same system. You'll be comparing different jobs. Hopefully, your goal is to get as many job offers as possible, right? And for them to kind of come in on a rotating basis. So you interviewed early November, and then you interviewed the 3rd week of November right before Thanksgiving, and then you get an offer early December, and then the question is that the ideal job, or do I want to try and wait a couple weeks to hear from the second interview? So what I would say is never commit to anything on the phone. Write it down. And I think, like you said, getting it in writing can be really important. And one reason it can be important is because you could use it to say, I have this other offer, and their base is $5,000 more than you. So is it possible you could come up? And so what you can do, sometimes department chairs are very leery to put things in writing, is you can write it and say, here's what I understood from our conversation. Is this correct? And they just write and say, yeah, it was a great talk. Yeah, it is correct. So then you have it in writing. And if you haven't heard back on the second interview, you can call the search chair and say, well, I have an offer. They've given me a week to think about it. So if there's any offer coming from you, I'll need to hear back because I've decided I need to have a job. I'm willing to take this one, but you would be my favorite. So I'd love to hear from you before I commit, but I have to hear back in a week. I think if you're offered a job, they expect to hear back in no more than 9 days. Like if you get it on a Friday, you might be able to wait till Monday, like the next week, so in 8 or 9 days. But they might be holding on an offer to somebody else, so really not beyond that. I remember I had a student starting out, and she thought, well, I'll let you know next month, and she nearly lost the job there. It's because next month was 5 weeks away. She didn't understand the sensitivity about time. So I think really, a lot of times they really expect you to have an answer in 3 or 4 days. Everybody will give you the advice to negotiate hard on your base. Negotiate really hard on your base because all future salaries will be a function of that base. If your increases, here our increase, I think in Columbus was 1% this year. So they'd figure out how much they're going to take in and how much they can increase they can give you. And then Columbus was 1%, New York was 2%. But remember, that's 2%, and the next year it might be 2, and the following year 3, and the next year 1. But that's that base you negotiated 5 years ago, right? So really working hard to have multiple offers where you can kind of compare them. It will help you on the base. And I think everybody wonders, what is the starting salary now? And I really don't know. I'm a little out of touch, but I think certainly over 50, often around 60.
It depends where you're going. So I've done this fairly recently. So the Chronicle of Higher Ed also has salary information. It's not necessarily the best place to get it, but you can compare. So if you're going to, and it breaks it out by like liberal arts college, research 1, research 2, all different ways. So that's a good place to look. I think this is the most important part of this whole process. Like, you get the phone call, you say, can we talk later? And really now you're going to do a bunch of research and work in that time period. So you can look at the Chronicle of Higher Ed. It's a public university, you can look, right? So when I had a weird trajectory, but when I was renegotiating 2.5 years ago, I could pull every assistant professor's salary information.
Yeah, if
for
you
Ohio
Google
State.
Adrian Rodgers OSU salary, you'll probably find mine from last year. It's always a year or two lag
Yeah.
time, right? Yeah. In about 3 clicks.
But that's true for any public university, and even some private universities now, they may not put it out with names attached, but they will put it out in terms of rank. And so, and there'll be differences, right? Like, you may not be able to negotiate for the highest paid assistant professor. They might actually be in their 5th year, ready to go up for tenure and things like that, but you want a pretty good idea of what the salaries would be, not only for the university that you're negotiating with, but if you do have someplace else that you might get an offer from or that you think would be comparable, you want to have a good sense of the salary there.
Yeah. So it's great when somebody you've met at the university started there last year, and then you can Google their salary and you know what they got, right? And so then you would probably expect to like a little bit more because that was last year's salary, and so increases are generally 2%. And so you want to do better than they did. You want to be a better negotiator than they are. So really working hard at the base can be important. Yeah.
And something that I always clarify, because I don't know that everyone knows this, I did not know this when I was graduating. Like, if you get grant money and things, that doesn't add to your salary. It replaces the salary that you're already paid. So, even if you have great aspirations, you're going to go out, you're going to get these big grants, it doesn't add to your salary. It pays the university and they pay less of your salary. So just know that. That's why it's not like you're getting, I'm getting a $50,000 grant and my salary. No. Part of your time on that grant is going to replace your salary.
Yeah. I'm getting millions in grants doesn't mean you're getting millions in salary. So negotiate hard on the base, and the other thing that I would say is, if you see, well, the guy in business is getting $100,000 as assistant professor. Yeah, that's business. We're in ed, so you have to compare with the education, right? Because our salaries are going to be around 50 or 60 or 40 to start. And then the other thing that I would say is there is a limit, because there's something called salary compression. So what happens is you bring somebody in 5 years ago, and the past 5 years budgets have not been good. They've been getting a 1% increase for 5 years, and they might have gotten hired in at like 48. So their salary now is 52, and now the starting salary for faculty might be 55. So you're getting a salary of 55. They can't offer you 55 because you cannot make more than that guy who's been there for 5 years. Because if you do, then they're going to, lodge a complaint with human resources to get a raise. And there might be 10 people who are in that category. So there is definitely a limit that they cannot pass. Even if you might have a competing offer that pays more, they might say, I'm sorry, this is our limit. And there could be practical internal reasons for that. And there are lots of reasons to take lower base at a place that you perceive as better that's going to help you throughout your career, and that you're going to be happier in. Happiness has no value, right? I mean, no financial value. If you're there and you're happy, that can mean a lot, so much, okay? Plus the lifestyle. Are you a city kid, or are you a rural kid, or what? The one thing that, too, we forgot was moving expenses. So something that I've learned is not everywhere, but a lot of places, the moving expenses don't come from the department. They come from like a central office. And so you can ask about what the moving expenses are. And sometimes they have a lot of money for moving expenses, like $5,000 or $8,000 or some pretty big number. That can be helpful for a couple of groups. One is, you're the married person with 6 children. All of a sudden, you don't have to pack a U-Haul. Oh my God, what a great thing, right? The moving expenses are also, you can have one trip before the actual move to go look for a house or an apartment. The other thing is for the internationals. All that stuff you put in storage in Singapore or in, London at exorbitant storage rates, you can have that moved here. Wouldn't that be cool? If you have some special needs and they're going, well, we're hiring her from Columbus, but you could say, yeah, but, I grew up in Singapore, so I got a lot of stuff in storage there. I want to move that. I've just priced it out, and it's going to be around $5,000. But you said you had $7,000 in the moving fund, so I'm going to be using that. Then that's great. It's like a gift, and it's tax-free because it's an expense, right, against cost. So something for the internationals or people with big families to know. I once helped a guy move, and I got there, and he didn't have any boxes, but he had 5 garbage bags. And that was it. That was his entire student life, in those 5 garbage bags. So, any other questions about negotiating the offer? And this is also a time we open up everything to general discussion about anything we've talked about today.
I have a question about negotiating and prioritizing.
Yeah.
So say I really want them to hire my spouse. Is that the big thing you ask for, or do you say hire my spouse and can you give me a higher base? Like, where's the line? Or I want some research funds. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to be that simple maintenance person that asks for 100 things after they hire you.
It's tricky because the spouses are tricky, right? Because the spouse or partner or whatever has their search going on simultaneously. And I remember, I was a spouse. My spouse got a position here, which is really rare to come right out of PhD school and get a position here. And then, because of that, I focused on looking for jobs in Ohio. And then I think I got 2 or 3 offers, so I picked the one that was best for me. So it's really tricky. And then the spousal hire, if you have a spousal hire and the institution's willing to do it, what else can you ask for? It can be tricky, right? So,
Yeah, I read like you can get spousal hire, just shut up.
and take it, my
Take
God.
it,
Yeah,
that's really
But on the
cool.
other hand, if the spouse has an offer 10 miles down the road, it means
Right,
not
yes.
not really, right?
Yes.
So yeah. So I would just encourage you to just get a little spreadsheet here and write it all down. And many of us are not so fortunate to have 2 offers at the same time. We take the one that we have. But if you do a fairly big search, it might be that you'll have 2 or 3 offers, and that they'll overlap slightly, so you'll have a little bit of choice.
I wouldn't think that the spousal hire though should negate you asking for other things. I mean, you don't want
Right.
to ask for 1,000 things, but sometimes it's helpful to understand kind of where funds are coming from, because chances are the funds that would cover your spousal hire are not a pool of funds that would cover moving expenses, which are not the pool of funds that would cover things like a GA and some travel money and things like that. So I don't think I'd go in being like, this is the only thing I want. Maybe prioritizing, but like when I was negotiating, they didn't want to negotiate in the base salary, but they were like, look at this shiny new GRA we could give you. Look at this. Look at this beautiful desk you could have in your, right? Because those were one-time expenses, and that was from a different pot of money, and that was really easy for them to give to me. But what I really wanted was the base salary, because I know how important that is. So just, I think you're going to have your priorities of things you want, but I wouldn't say spousal hire and then I'm not going to ask for.
Another way to think about it is when you go in for the interview, you're at your weakest, right? You're kind of your meekest. You're going to put up with the light bulb that's burned out in your bedroom at the hotel, and you're going to ask very carefully planned questions that you figured out in advance. Now here, you're at your most powerful. They've decided they want you. As long as you don't cuss them out, they can be very good at saying no. So this is your chance, right, to get what you can. And if they just can't do it, they'll just say, we just can't do that. So you can tell I'm from Canada, right?
Yeah,
in Canada, we
you're
say we're
sorry.
sorry we
Yeah.
can't do it. Here, so not doing it. Anything else about anything we've talked about today?
Should you have an attorney review everything before you sign it?
I've never heard of anyone doing that before. There would be reasons to not do it, and that would be because the attorney doesn't know the culture, and so they'll see 10 different
Certainly.
things, right? But I guess if it was especially tricky or something, there might be a reason to do so.
It's a contract.
Of course, yeah. The other thing too is, once you say yes orally, the expectation is you are committed, and then the written contract should come within a week or 2. And once you sign that, you are committed. And I have heard of somebody saying yes orally, and then later they took another job, and the dean of the first university called the second, and the second university said, we're withdrawing our offer. So, once you say yes, especially with some places, they're going to interpret that as a commitment, and they will enforce that commitment.
And once you actually have an offer letter, so when I was saying get it in writing, if you can get it informally in writing, get it in writing. Definitely make sure that the things that were verbally agreed to show up in your actual offer letter. But once you have that offer letter, the negotiations are pretty much done. So I didn't realize that either, right? So there was an early on mistake of like, we got to the point of like, I had an offer letter and I was like, oh, well, I should have negotiated. No, negotiations are done at that point.
Any insight, just looking around the room, on negotiating as a woman, and sort of what that process is like? Because I've heard it's a very.
So I read a couple books. I felt like I had to be really prepared going in and know what I wanted. It was very hard for me. Something that I actually think made it easier for me personally was that it depends on whether you'll negotiate with the chair or with the dean. I was negotiating with the dean, who happened to also be female, so for some reason for me that felt a little bit more empowering. I felt like I had to have facts, so I felt that, and that was something I'd actually read too, like if I went in feeling prepared, I might feel a little bit stronger. I don't know, I think it's for me just personally, it was really hard.
Yeah, I mean, be tough, but I think there are limits. It's a female-dominated profession in terms of school teaching, and I don't know, I think we're more equitable in higher ed in terms of the faculty and, male-female ratio. Sometimes I feel that tension, negotiating with females, but not usually. I'm the junior, right? Yeah, because the administrators here are women, so in my department. Other closing thoughts?
How is it perceived if you ask for something and they say no?
I think that's fine, especially at this stage. Yeah, I can't do it. You can ask for a couple more things. If you get 3 can't do it's in a row, that's you're probably at the limit, right? I found there's a book called Negotiate This, and it's a great book. I love it. So you might want to get that off Amazon for $5. But one of the things that he says in there is, and plus you'll get discounts now, like you wouldn't believe when you go buy something, but because you'll be a better negotiator. But one of the things there that they said is that when the speed of the negotiation increases, so before it's like I'll think about it and then 3 days later you get back to them and 2 days later and then a day and then within an hour it's like and then you've got your limit, then that sort of signals the close of the negotiation. And I think the other thing that they suggest is you start with the biggest thing first, and negotiate as hard as you can for that thing, and when you figured out what the limit is on that, maybe the base isn't quite where you want it, so then you negotiate the others, the pretty desk. Because you already know where they are at the limit on the base. If you negotiate the pretty desk first, then they might say, well, we gave you a pretty desk. We don't have enough money to increase your base, right? So start with the biggest things first, and then work your way down.
Andrew, not gonna go back and forth 20 times,
Right.
right? So I would start with base and do that, and also say, here's what I'm also thinking in terms of, I always just called it startup package, right? But it was all of those other things. I wanted a GRA for 2 years, I wanted 1 month summer salary the first 2 years to cover my time to write grants. And then, they came back and said, well, we can do this, this, and this, but we can't do this. If there was something really important in there, I pushed on it, but that was it. It was like 3 going back and forth,
Yep.
and that was it. So it wasn't like okay, well, I'd like nice office space. Well, we can't do that. Okay, well then it wasn't that kind of a negotiation. It was more of like base salary first, then kind of startup package, and then like final details.
And so you might even write an email on the end. I'm just thinking about the lawyer, right? So when you think you've got agreement on everything, say, okay, here's what I think I'm agreeing to, blah, 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 blah. And based on that, I'm saying yes, and I look forward to seeing the contract that will have these items, and so on. And sometimes those contract letters are sort of templates. So they may not have all things in it, like some of the small stuff. That are generally understood. For example, if everyone knows at Newark, and all the search committee members said, we get $2,800 a year here for travel, and that's not in the letter, I wouldn't sweat that, because it's an established practice, right?
If you've been
They're
guaranteed,
not going to not give it to you next year
Right.
when everybody else is getting it, right?
if you've been guaranteed a month of summer salary though for 2 years or
Yeah.
something like that, that needs to be in there because that's a really easy thing that can be like, well, we're not really sure. No,
Yeah.
get that in.
Things
In writing.
things unique to you, like your base, because everybody's base is slightly different at least, if not substantially different. Yeah, and that's, coming from a school teaching experience where, we were in a union and we had a grid and everybody starts at the same, and if you have a master's, you get this much. There are faculty here, some of them came in at, I'm just thinking about particular people, so some of them would have come in at maybe 52, and somebody else with similar experience came in at 92. Yeah. Because there were certain things that they were able to bring. So when I say similar experience, they had a PhD, they both had PhDs, they both had 10 years, they had
On
similar
paper they're the same.
publications. Yeah. But somebody got a much higher starting salary because she was in or he was in a perceived area of need, or brought a certain reputation, or those kinds of things. Now, you guys are much more flat, right? Because you're all starting with similar. But, over time, that's going to start to change. Based on your grant history, based on your publication history, what journals. Yeah. The last thing that I would say is, congratulations, it's over. You've got your job. How wonderful. Enjoy it. Take a week off, go to the beach, decompress from all of that, stuff of the dissertation and whatnot. And then go to your new job and get your keys and get your ID. And I would say two things. First, look at the rooms that they've got you put in. If you're that person who needs to always work in groups and they've put you in the 300-seat theater where the seats are screwed to the floor and you're teaching Monday at 11, which is when every other class in the world is on, and there's no possible way you can be moved, that's something you want to try and sort out in July. Not Labor Day, right? After you walk in that first day, it's like, I didn't know it was here. So that would be one thing. Go there, get set up, look at the rooms, and think about your courses, have collected the syllabi, ordered your books, and all that stuff. And then the second thing is, even if you're at a teaching-intensive institution, the one thing that you can always have that nobody can take away from you is publication. Nobody really... People care about the SEIs you got in your course last year for your raise and whether you're going to be tenured. People don't really care whether you got good SEIs 10 years ago or 8 years ago. But people will always know how many publications you have, how many are first authored, how many are sole authored, what journals they were in, even when it's 10 years ago. That's the stuff that'll follow you throughout your career. So just really work on your publications. If it's teaching intensive and you only get one out a year and it's published, great, you got one out. If it's research intensive and you get 3 out, great, you get 3 out. But get something out. Get something out. I went through the doctoral program. I think we had 6 good friends. My wife said, we need to have some recognition of when we pass our candidacy exam. So she created a little crown of cardboard, and she stick-em letters on there. So we called it the hat of letters. And every time one of our buddies passed their candidacy exam, we signed on the inside. And when I think back to the 6 or 8 people who signed that, I would say maybe 3 of us got tenured. 2 people quit and went into other stuff. Can you imagine? You worked so hard on a PhD and they quit. They're no longer in higher ed, and they're not, especially in education, selling real estate. And then, one person I think went through 5 different assistant professor jobs. And then she got a lecturer, so now she's removed.